Well, hello, avid readers. Trisha Goyer here, and I get to talk to one of our favorite authors today, Jane Kirkpatrick, and we are talking about her new book, Across the Crying Sands, which I think the title is excellent. But Jane, welcome so much. It's so great to see you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back again. So I
Yeah.
appreciate your
Oh,
attention to the stories.
absolutely. Well, start by telling us a little bit about yourself for those who might not be familiar with you.
So I'm Jane Kirkpatrick, not Jean Kirkpatrick, who
Yeah.
used to be the ambassador to the United Nations. I,
Oh,
I
okay.
do I do a lot of public speaking, and sometimes people have that funny look on their face, like, could she be that person? Like, no, I'm a writer. And writing is my second career. I was a clinical social worker, mental health director, a rancher, homesteader, and that's when I started writing. So my sort of, I sort of fell into it, but I began writing novels based on the lives of actual historical women
Mhm.
and their families and so on. And this is my 41st book. I think it's
Awesome.
the 35th novel. The others were nonfiction books, but yeah. So I'm delighted to be back, and it's the first book in a three-book series. So,
Yes, we're gonna mention that. So it's the series is The Women of Cannon Beach. So tell us
correct.
about Cannon Beach. I've been there. We've stayed
Oh,
there. I just remember
yes,
we stayed in a seaside hotel. It was like a small one. I don't think it had many rooms. And I remember going to bed that night and just hearing the crashing of the waves. It was the best feeling,
yes.
like just to lulled me to sleep. So for those who may not be familiar with Cannon Beach, why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, it's on the North Oregon coast, and it's a very rugged section. And Cannon Beach, that section is about 7 miles long, and it was quite isolated for many years. And it took 7 hours to go from the little town of Seaside, which some people may
Mhm.
know, Astoria, and to get to it until there were roads that were built, and people were more associated with San Francisco and Seattle because they would take ships to go to those places. That was easier than trying to go inland. So
Yes.
it's a very flat section, but it has these iconic rocks, Haystack Rock and the Needles and Hug Point. They have all these interesting names, and they're um, quite astonishing when you come across them. If you remember, you'd be on that, you come over some of the sand dunes, and
Yes.
suddenly there is this gorgeous beach and these massive rocks, and the waves come in and they surround those rocks and they pull out, and actually the title is based on the native people, the Nehalem and Tillamook people, who in the late 1700s, there was an earthquake and there was a tsunami that came in.
Mm.
And with a tsunami, the tide goes way out. They call them king tides. And so native women were going out and digging for clams and mussels and so
Mhm.
on. And then, unbeknownst to them, of course, the tide came in and many, many women died. And when you walk on that sand, it has a different sound, and people
Mhm.
refer to it, native people called it, they were crying sands. And other people have called it singing sands. So, but there is a distinctive sound on it, which would when we were titling, that seemed like a really interesting way of talking about a beach area that wasn't the typical Cannon Beach.
Right, yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes. And I love right from the beginning, we're in a time of history, which I want you to explain a little bit. And we have a lot of immigrants here. And, so there's people that have abandoned ship. And I want you to explain the second born son. And that I didn't even know that was a
yes,
thing. So I'm so fascinated. Okay, so first let's talk about the main characters because I'm fascinated that they're a interesting collection of people that you brought together and right from the beginning, we won't give too much away, but there's this perilous situation, and you're sure that something's
yeah,
going to happen one way, and it's just like I was just swept up. literally swept up in your ocean book right from the beginning. So tell us a little bit about the characters.
So the primary character, the anchor, I call her, is Mary Edwards Garretsey, and she, we believe, was born in New York, then came to Minnesota, then came to the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and eventually
Hmm.
couldn't go any farther west. Ended up in Nehalem, which is south of Cannon Beach, with her parents. There's some question that's left unresolved about her beginnings, but
Hmm.
when she's 16, she marries a man who was from the Netherlands. And he was a sailor and he jumped ship in Astoria and lived in the Clatsop Plains area, learned English. And he's 8 years older than Mary, and they
Hmm.
marry. And along with them and their friends are what you were referring to were many British people who were basically kind of sent um, to the New World. They were usually the second sons of wealthy people who, like women, could not inherit. And so the older brothers really, preferred to get rid of the younger brother who had nothing to take to a relationship because he couldn't inherit anything. And so Herbert Logan is one of the they called them remittance men because they would get a
Hmm.
remittance from the family to stay away monthly or annually. It's kind of the reverse of upstairs, downstairs. This was like
Yes.
inland, outland, or something.
And that's
Um,
far out loud. Like we're sending you
yeah,
far away.
yeah, exactly. So, but I was intrigued with that, and
Hmm.
many of these men, Joe Walsh was another one, and but they contributed greatly to the development of this area. They never became citizens. They just plied their trade. Herbert was really quite a brilliant man, and he made some investments. And he longs for someone that he's left behind in England, and so that's part of the story. And then another main character is a woman who I've called Jewel, and she represents the Nehalem people, the
Yes.
Nehalem Tillamook people, and who, of course, were there first, and who have watched these changes come to their land. And it's that sort of capacity to make friends with your neighbors, even when they're not like you,
Hmm.
and for especially for Mary, who she married young, and then they had four children really quickly, closely together. Excuse me. And John, her husband, it was a terrible place to homestead. There was
Mm.
massive trees and brambleberries and terrible weather. It rained lots, and so being a homesteader was just took incredible endurance, and and they would do anything they could to make a living. And so John took a mail route,
Okay.
and he ended up only being able to be with Mary and the baby, and eventually more babies, like one day a week,
Oh,
and then the
wow.
weekend, because it took that long to make the route. And one of the things that intrigued me about this story as I began researching it was that Mary became the first woman to deliver mail on that same route in the 1890s. And at the time, they had four children, and they hired a nanny to look after the children so that Mary could do this rather dangerous work of delivering the mail. And that was part of, for me, in each of my stories, I have to find what I call the unanswered question.
Hmm.
And for me, that was the unanswered question. How did it happen that this couple with four children came to that decision? What was it that Mary was struggling with, and how did becoming the postal carrier somehow make it a richer experience for her and her family? So that's
Yeah.
part of that's part of what you have to read to find out.
Oh,
Hopefully,
I
I've
cannot
captured
wait.
it.
I cannot wait. And I love that you are inspired and research these real people in history because it's so fascinating. I was just cleaning out my closet right now and I came across a box of letters and stuff I'd got from World War II veterans. And I just
Oh,
wanted to sit down and just start reading them again.
yes.
And, you can read in a history book and it gives you such a broad picture of people in history, not even people, of events in history. But I love going to little small historical societies and hearing about the true people because it's amazing. I mean, so Mary must have been in her early 20s when with four children, on a
Yeah.
mail route and
Yeah.
homesteading this very difficult thing. I'm thinking I have daughters in my mid 20s that are, getting their eyelashes done and their
Yeah.
nails done. And, you know,
Yeah.
and it's just like such a complete thing. I would
Yeah.
just love to hear about like I know you talked about that was that intriguing question. Tell us a little bit about the research behind it, and I can just imagine your head popping up when you're like, "This is it. This is the thing I want to write about."
Yeah. Well, it took me, so one of the readers who has read all of my books, and about 14 years ago, she came to an event in another state. She drove several hours to come because she had decided that she knew about Mary Garretsey
Oh,
and she knew about her life. And she said, "This is going to be your next book." Well, I already had several other books in the
yeah.
works. And I was, I said, "Oh, thank you so much." And that's very kind of you. And, but you could write this story. And she's like, "No, I'm not a writer. I'm a teacher. But I love to do research and I would help you." And I said, "Well, we'll have to, I was gentle, I thought, but it didn't deter her. And so for the next 14 years, she would send me things about Cannon Beach or about Mary or about
Mhm.
the children. She would talk about the development. And there was one day when I was watching TV, and it was New Year's Day, and it was after the Rose Parade. I think it's when they have the National Dog Show,
Oh, yes.
and so it was the 75th anniversary or something. And the two hosts, two men, um, exchanged gifts for each other. And one of the hosts gave to his other host a painting that had been done from a photograph. And the photograph was of him with his Cavalier King Charles Spaniel at Haystack Rock on Cannon Beach. And so I was like, okay, the universe is telling me, pay attention to this story. So, and then about 2 years ago, I approached my editor at Rebel and said, I want to do something a little different, in part because my husband has his health issues had become very complicated. So I knew I wasn't
Mm,
going to be able to travel to do the research. I usually spent time in the basements of courthouses, looking at
right.
documents. And I call it my three pronged approach is to try to go there when I'm researching, walk where people walked,
Mhm.
then looking at documents and maps, and then ephemera, which is everything that isn't a document or a map. And for Mary, one of the pieces of ephemera that is quite remarkable is that we still have her saddle that she
Oh,
used to ride
wow.
her special horse Jake, and later Prince, across these really rugged mountain sections along the coast with 800-foot drop offs and so on. So, so Susie, her name was Susie Winchin, and during those, now 12 years it took before I wrote it. She, got married. She fell in love. She got married, and she's, constantly sending me things. And she and her husband have become very good friends of my husband and I. And we still, in fact, I don't know if you could see it, but she just popped up because my newsletter just came out. I just got back from the North Oregon coast where we did some events for this new book.
Mhm.
And she just popped up there saying, "Hey, great newsletter." So, um, yeah. So, I'm heavily rely on um, what I call, public historians as
Mhm.
well as general historians. And this last week, because it's a 3-book series, I'm still doing some research, particularly for the
Yes.
third book, and contacted an architectural library that I didn't know existed in Portland. And one of the women that will be adding to the Women of Cannon Beach, her husband was an architect in Portland, and after he died, she built a cottage at Cannon Beach.
Oh,
And so there
wow.
are all these little linkages that have just been a gift, that I have all these wonderful people around me to help support the research. So,
I love that. And I love that. I mean, you know this too, but every day, not every day, maybe once a month, someone's like, "You need to write this. You need to write this." We hear it
Yeah,
so many
I know.
times, and it's like, uh-huh. But honestly, I have some stories too that have come from that, some books
Yeah,
that have come from
exactly.
that, because it's like that is
Yeah.
an amazing idea.
And
But that's so exciting.
a couple of times I have said to people, You can write this." And they're like,
Hmm.
"No, no, no." And I'll say, "Yeah, I'll support you, I'll encourage you." And so one of the women did do that. It was a really fascinating story. It was set in Florida. And she got back to me and she showed me and she said the family was really happy. It was more of a biography, which is
Yes.
what someone did and when they did it. And of
Hmm.
course, fiction allows us to explore
Hmm.
their motivation and how they might have felt when they did these. The history is the spine of what and when, and then fiction is the stuff of sinew and muscle, and so I had to think of it. But when she sent me a copy of what she'd done, and she said the family was really happy, and she said, "But I don't feel satisfied." And I read it and I said, "I think you're not satisfied because you didn't talk about why that story wouldn't let you go. What
Mm.
was it about this woman and your interaction with her? You've captured her story, her family's happy, but your story is still unfinished." And so she was going to go back and sort of rethink why why was she willing to spend that much time of her life to get that story down. And of course, I don't know about you, but I always think, oh, this is a story about a woman who delivered mail on the Oregon coast.
Yes.
But then when I get done, I realize, it was about, you know, persevering through enormously confusing times. It's
Hmm.
about trying to find out our who loves us and where did we come from. With just so many more aspects that I didn't anticipate would happen. So, that's the gift we get by writing the
Absolutely.
stories that we've been, that claim us. So,
I
yeah.
know I always feel like I get to the end of a novel that I'm writing, and I'm like, "Oh, I hope a reader enjoys this, but I needed this. I needed to pull out." It's
Yes.
like the right scriptures, the right inspiration, and whispers to my heart that the struggles that I'm going through, it might be completely different than the character struggles, but all those
Yeah.
emotions are funneled, and then we're like, "Oh, God is with me. God is with me.
Yeah.
He is
Yeah.
in the middle of this."
And I think that's what allows readers to be moved by those stories, because
Mhm.
somehow it's that it's that channel, it's God's channel through us that allows other people to sort of step inside our stories and discover things for themselves. And
Mhm.
and people are very complimentary to me about, oh, your books got me through some really tough times, and I'm grateful for that. But it wasn't me.
Yes.
I don't want to say. I mean, I say that to some extent, but I'm also very conscious that it isn't me. And I don't
Mhm.
know about you, but sometimes I'll write something and I'll think, I didn't know I knew that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I didn't know that because it was that voice, that spirit, really allowing me to get inside the story and try to tell it in a way, the best way I know how, and to know that I'm not alone while I'm telling the story.
Absolutely, and story is emotion. When I teach fiction, I'm like, "What's story made of?" And everyone, plot and characters and all that. But yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's emotion. I mean, if you just have
Yeah,
plot and characters, it's a history book. You know, you just
yeah,
have this happened and
exactly.
that happened and
Yeah,
this happened. But really, it is fear and anger and overcoming odds and resilience and joy after hardship. All those things are what makes story. They're the emotions that make the story. And I
yes,
love that. And when our emotions are peaked and God's speaking to our heart, and it might not even be the same messages. Every reader experiences a book completely different because they all bring
exactly.
their own stories and their own
Yeah,
emotions to it,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is just amazing part that we get to be part of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Willa Cather said that the stories that engage writers are based on the experiences that we had before we turned 15. So it's a
Mm.
really that volatile time. And she said it was passion and betrayal are the two big emotions that drive those. And I've always thought, I would add two more. One is acceptance, because I think
Mhm.
that's what adolescents are looking for, is to find themselves inside a story. And the other one is forgiveness, that we look
Mhm.
to story to help us make sense of maybe the poor decisions that we made. And I tell my friends sometimes that I will read a book and think, well, at least I wasn't as stupid as that character. You know, I made the same mistake,
Yeah.
but I dealt with it differently. But I think that that's part of that longing as well, is to sort of find meaning in our life. And stories are a they're like this opening to help us find that. And so I feel really privileged to
Mhm.
be able to spend time telling those stories.
I love the part where, we talked about earlier about the sand, and even the sand has a story, and that played into your title. Um, can you share the title of your next book?
So, well, the title of the second book is "With the Enduring Tides," which is, of course, impactful of the sands, and we have not titled the third book yet. But all of the stories are going to be centered around that beach, Cannon Beach, the Crying Sands, and it will. I mean, the second book, for example, is very much Mary and her family's struggle with dealing with the enormous challenges of being a parent and of finding the importance of family. And for Mary, it goes even a little stronger because her family was very supportive of her dealing with her stresses when she was a young parent, and they move away, and her daughter, her oldest daughter, Belle, wants to live with them. And
Mm.
so there is that strain that goes on, and then some bad things happen, and the family has to make some major decisions about whether they leave the Crying Sands, or whether they find a way to stay.
Oh, that sounds so good. And is book 3 also following Mary's story?
Yes. So Mary is the anchor of all three books, and so we'll learn more about her life, but also about what's happened to Jewel, and about what happens to the remittance man, Herbert, there's also the introduction of a couple of new women of Cannon Beach who find a way to support each other, and that's part of the second book. The diverse the diverse nature of women who found themselves on the Oregon coast, as rugged as it is, they stayed. And in the first book, you may have discovered that Mary was a poet, and she wrote a poem about the puffins, which are these lovely little birds with orange beaks, and they kind of look, I don't know, they look to me a little like small penguins, but they
They
aren't.
do look like
Um,
penguins, yes.
yeah, but they mate for life. And so I have Mary writing a poem that she gives to John as a wedding present about the puffins mating for life. And the last line is that they stay no matter how. And so I really think this series in some ways is about how people stay, how they remain at their posts as a parent or as a husband, as someone trying to follow God's calling in their life, how they find a way to stay no matter the challenges, no matter the hardships.
I love that. I love that. Oh, I cannot wait to read more. And I always love to ask, do you read a lot of Christian fiction? And maybe what are some of your favorite Christian novels that you've read?
Say the first part about that.
Okay. Do
Can I name?
yeah, just name some of your favorite Christian novels that
Oh,
you've
well,
read.
one of my favorites is from Susan Meisner, called "The Shape of Mercy," and I think
Mhm.
it's because, again, I like the stories that are based on real situations, and that was a story that's kind of three generations, but it goes back to the Salem witch trials
Yes.
and the craziness of what was going on then, and a young college student who's got a job interpreting or reworking a manuscript or diary that supposedly is from one of those women who was charged with being a witch. And I loved the whole concept of mercy in that story of all three women that were involved. And I think that's one of the stories that I was really touched by. And Karen Barnett has this whole series that are set in the national parks, which
Yes.
is a wonderful setting for all these different things. I'm sorry to say I can't remember the one right before her, the current one about the trees, but it was set in the Olympic National Forest, which is in Washington State, and um, and and there's just such a precious scene about someone coming to coming to know Jesus in a way that is
Mm.
so non-preachy and so um, gently portrayed. I just think that Karen has a very great gift for reaching out to non-churched people through stories of places that a lot of people participate in terms of the national parks. So,
Yes, and she also writes about ties in real characters and real events in her
yes,
books
that's right.
too.
Yes, yes, yeah. So I'm
That
sort of
is,
drawn
is
to
it
those.
a road to paradise? Is that the one?
Oh, that's another one of hers. Yeah, yes.
Yes,
The
I
Olympic
can't
Park
remember
one, I
the.
can't remember. Oh, that's
I
terrible.
know, I'm trying
Oh,
to remember too. I'm sitting there. Um,
I could look it up, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
I'm trying to look it up, but yeah, she has so many wonderful books. Yeah,
yeah,
go just read
I love
everything
her
that she
writing.
writes too.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
just this I had this interesting experience. I just finished reading The Frozen River, which is a big bestseller from 2023. Really tough subject. It's set in Maine in like the late 1700s about a midwife, and it's based on a woman named Martha Ballard who was a midwife who kept a diary, and it's got death and murder and other kinds of tragedies, particularly for women. But at the very end, I read it through, read the author's notes, and at the very end, she has a very short paragraph about how she was rescued by Jesus as a young girl in New Mexico. And I
Oh,
thought, well,
wow.
that's just really a precious statement of her writing life, and that she chose to include that in her author's notes. I thought was really interesting. She also says that, how people, like I say in mine, that I, split my time between Oregon and California. She says she splits her time between the grocery store and her children's soccer field. I love that. I
Oh,
think that was really inventive. I need to think of something less boring than, oh, I split my time between California and Oregon.
yes.
So,
And that's what when we have to write and research in the little bits of time. I mean,
yes,
caregiving, whether it's my grandma lives with me, but I also have teenagers in the house, so we're caring for people. We're going through our daily lives, and then we're kind of our minds are on these stories that we're able to put into books for people.
yes, yeah.
I love that. So, tell us, Jane, where can people go to find more information about you and your books?
My website is jkbooks.com, and I actually do a monthly newsletter called Story Sparks. And that comes from, I think that stories are the sparks that light our
Mm.
ancestors' lives, and they're the embers that we blow on to illuminate our own lives. And so it's kind of an inspirational piece, and I did a giveaway, a seashore sorts of treasures giveaway for this book, and and all you had to do was be a subscriber. It's a free newsletter, and it went to somebody in Texas, so
Oh,
she got some
good.
seashore stuff. But and then I have a Facebook page, and I'm on BookBub and Goodreads, and the author Facebook page is a good one, and Instagram. Although I have to say I'm not particularly skilled at all those things, all those
Yes.
social media things. But I'm very faithful to get my newsletter out, and people report back that it's always a very encouraging newsletter. So I'm grateful for that.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I cannot wait to finish this book.
Well, I appreciate so much that you were willing to read it and to have this conversation with me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.